Hi, and welcome to Real Talk. Today, I'm going to share a little bit about appraisals. What is an appraisal? How does that fit into the real estate process? And why do we care? Let's start with what is the appraisal. So once you make an offer on a home, you're offering, say, $500,000. As a finance buyer, it is a term of your contract, unless you've waived it, and your loan that the home appraise for the purchase price that you offered. Let's say that you were going to put 20% down. We're going to keep the numbers real nice and even. So that would be a $100,000 down payment and a mortgage of about $400,000. The home you want to buy has to appraise at the purchase price of $500,000 to lock those numbers in. The buyer pays the fee, which typically ranges between $450 and $600, and the bank secures the appraiser and manages the appraisal process. If everything works out, check all the boxes are checked, the lender will say, great, appraisal came in at value. If it came in at $520,000, you're super happy as a buyer, you know you got a good deal. But what happens if the appraisal doesn't come in at value? If it doesn't come in at the purchase price that you offered? What if it appraised at $450,000? Okay, now what? All right, so your 20% down payment and your mortgage are based now on $450,000, not the $500,000 that you offered. So what's 20% of $450,000? We've got $90,000. Doesn't seem crazy, right? Okay, $10,000 difference, not bad. So 90,000 minus 450 is what? We've got 360,000. And then this is where it gets hard, okay? We still don't have numbers that match 500,000. So this becomes the gap, okay? So now the client, in addition to the down payment, has to bring another $50,000 to the table in order to close the gap between the appraised value and the purchase price. So up here, in a perfect world, the client is bringing $100,000 to the table. Down here, they're now bringing 90 plus 50, which is 140,000. That's a big difference. So if you were not anticipating that this was possible, what often happens when you get to 140,000 over 100,000 is the deal falls apart. Okay, so what are the options in that moment? If you are a finance buyer with an appraisal contingency, you now have two options. You can try and renegotiate with a seller for a reduced purchase price that matches the appraisal, or you have to bring that extra $40,000. Often in these scenarios, it's somewhere in between. If I'm a seller and I know that the comps show 450,000 and I took an offer for 500,000, I'm prepared, right? If you've got a good listing agent, they're talking this through with you and they're preparing you for any possibility. It is not required. The seller doesn't have to negotiate with you. They can say, go pound sand. We've got another buyer that can pay 500,000. But typically in these scenarios, good listing agents have prepped their clients and they're prepared to give a certain amount. That's why appraisals matter, and that's why you need to be thinking about the process prior to submitting an offer. Now, there's a couple unique scenarios with appraisals that are worth mentioning. So the first one is called an appraisal waiver or a desktop appraisal. So if you've done your homework and you have gotten pre-qualified, and when you are about to write an offer, you go over it with your lender, which everyone should, they can put it through the underwriting system and see if it qualifies, if your file qualifies for a desktop appraisal or an appraisal waiver. And essentially what that means is that they have looked at the property and the amount that you're putting down, and they've looked at comparable sales. There's enough comparable refinances and purchases in that area that they can see the value of the home without ever going out and seeing it. And so they will say, okay, check. You don't have to have an appraisal. Would you like one? Right? And it's a $450 to $600 cost savings. savings. So when offered, most clients decide, nope, I'm good. The other scenario where we see this is when you're putting more down. Okay, so let's say that in this scenario, the value is somewhere between 450 and 500, and the bank can see like, okay, there's a lot of sales here in the 450 range, not a ton in 500, but they're putting $300,000 down. Do we really care? No, we're good. They're putting enough down. They're assuming enough risk. Like, we will finance this without an in-person appraisal. So those are some of the reasons that we see that. And often it's an advantage. If you are a cash buyer and you're submitting cash, it's usually assumed that you're going to remove the appraisal contingency. And the reason being is because it's no longer a requirement of the financing, and it takes one step out of the process that makes a cash offer more of an advantage. For cash buyers who are like, well, I just want to make sure that I'm not overpaying, go for it. You can hire an appraiser to come out. You just have to be careful because, appraisers are usually selected by the bank, and they have a little bit more like quality control. If you have an appraiser come out who's not connected to a bank just to give you a number and it's not accurate, there's not a lot you can do to negotiate. You may have just blown $600 for nothing. For our FHA and VA buyers, their appraisal requirement comes with more conditions. With FHA, it's a little less stringent, but they want to make sure that everything is in good working order. There's no visible peeling paint. There's a couple different things that we know they would look for. VA is a little bit stricter. They're typically they require a clear Section 1 pest report. There is a waiver that you can get if there's no like active infestations. This is getting a little more granular. So if you are a VA or FHA buyer and you want to understand that a little bit more, please reach out. I'm happy to go over it with you. But I will say with those buyers, I recently had a transaction with, I was on the listing side with an agent who did not have experience with FHA financing and believed that the appraisal was going to call out certain conditions and require that we fixed it. And ultimately, it didn't. She banked way too much on that and essentially didn't negotiate for repairs that her buyer really wanted. And so when the appraisal didn't require it and it came back with no conditions at value, she had no negotiating power left to push for these repairs. And it was really unfortunate because they were repairs that we had discussed earlier in the transaction. FHA and VA buyers, take your time, find the right agents. And to all buyers and sellers, make sure you understand the appraisal process because it does contribute to the outcome for everybody. So have a good one. Let me know if you have any questions or if there's any additional topics you'd like to learn more about.